So we sued New York State and the election officials in New York City, who it looks like haven't cleaned their roles in large measure in 6 years at least.
So I'm going to tie this first story to 2000 Mules. If you haven't recognized him, that was Tom Fitton. He's the president of Judicial Watch. And if you don't follow Judicial Watch, I would recommend that you start to. They do a lot of good for this country and they can use all the support they could get. So as you can see, Tom is discussing how Judicial Watch sued the state of New York because they haven't cleared their voter rolls in 6 years. Let's hear a little bit more from Tom.
The lawsuit was filed this week. It's a federal lawsuit under the National Voter Registration Act. And as I described earlier, the NVRA requires states to conduct a general program that makes a reasonable effort to remove from their official voting rolls the names of ineligible voters who have died or changed residence or moved away. Among other things, the law requires registrations to be canceled when voters fail to respond to address confirmation notices and then fail to vote in the next two general federal elections. In 2018, the Supreme Court confirmed that such removals are mandatory.
All right, so let's begin tying this to 2000 Mules. As we just learned, the Supreme Court states that it's mandatory to clean voter rolls. So in 2000 Mules, we learned that there are a ton of ballots that are brought to drop boxes, and there's no way to identify who filled out the ballots. Now let's take a look at the next piece, and we'll make a further connection.
Finally, the Wisconsin Supreme Court is acknowledging that the executive branch, through this unelected bureaucratic agency, the Wisconsin Election Commission, violated state law in promulgating their rules that put out over 500 drop boxes that were against state law. The case here, and I have it with me, it's a 141-page ruling from the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. It is Teagan versus the Wisconsin Election Commission.
All right, so making a further connection, what did we learn? That in Wisconsin, there were an extra 500 drop boxes that were put out. So if we take a look at 2000 Mules, what do we know from that? We know that ballots were sent to nonprofit organizations. We had the mules picking them up from these nonprofit organizations and taking them to ballot boxes. So if you combine these first two pieces, you have voter rolls that are unclean, and you have organizations that are putting drop boxes across the state of Wisconsin and other states for the purpose of harvesting these ballots. As further connections are made or other updates are made available regarding 2000 Mules, I'll come back with that information for you. So I ran across this next piece and I wanted to share it with you. George and I have been talking a lot about Roe versus Wade, Margaret Sanger, that connection. And I thought it was important when I saw this piece to provide a similar perspective as George and I's, however, discussed by folks where this hits a little bit closer to home.
The worst thing that could have happened to Black life is Margaret Sanger. She studied under people like Nazis to say, how do we figure out a perfect race? She wanted to make sure that certain populations of people were controlled.
She wrote in a letter that she didn't want word to get out that she wanted to exterminate the Negro population. She considered people of color and the disabled to be like human weeds that should be pulled out of the ground, the ones that were unclean, the ones that were unfit.
She went after African American leaders and pastors to pay them to market to their people to kill their offspring so that there would not be that many Blacks in this country.
Unfortunately, those roots of eugenics, it really has borne fruit. African American women, we are 3 times more likely to abort than other races. And we have abortion as the #1 cause of death in our community. And it's truly devastating.
So my standout moments here are, number one, the Black population today is about 12.5% of our total population in the United States. Had Planned Parenthood not been pushing their agenda over the last 50 years, the Black population would have doubled by now. My second takeaway from this is a connection I made to another video that we produced. It talks about the fact that there's been a 40% increase in death among the 18 to 60 range, and that has nothing to do with COVID. That information was put out by insurance companies. I'm going to make a further connection in just a moment. Let's roll into a different story, and we'll tie that together as well.
Fentanyl, right now, the precursor is coming from China. Through the cartels, the imprint machines are in Mexico. They are killing a generation of our people, 250 deaths a day. And they're killing them between the ages of 18 and 45. I've said this before. They are killing those who are capable of going to war in this country. It's an undeclared war, and we're conspiring with it between Joe Biden and the progressive left.
All right, so there you can see it. Judge Jeannie's talking about how fentanyl is coming into this country. It starts out in China, makes its way through the Mexican border, and it's killing those between the ages of 18 and 45. The problem with fentanyl is it was pushed by our medical community for many years. They had advocated its use as a treatment without having enough information. Sound familiar? So let's go back and tie this all together before we run into our last story. We have voter rolls that aren't being purged. We have drop boxes that are being set up all across the United States. There's high potential for voter fraud, basis the analysis of 2,000 mules. As a result, we have an administration that is allowing fentanyl to come into this country, and an administration that continues to support an agenda that appears to be suppressing certain segments of our population, while at the same time shouting from the rooftops about the inequity that's aimed about that segment of the population. All right, let's move into this last story.
You know what the Joint Chiefs told us the greatest threat facing America was? Global warming. According to the intelligence community, terrorism from white supremacy is the most lethal threat to the homeland today. Not ISIS, not Al-Qaeda, white supremacy.
Okay, so that's Sleepy Joe's rhetoric. Let's see what the FBI really has to say.
We consistently see that it's the Chinese government that poses the biggest long-term threat to our economic and national security. And by our, I mean both of our nations along with our allies in Europe and elsewhere.
Piece. The FBI is directly pointing toward China. China has infiltrated our country, our education system. They're bringing drugs into this country through Mexico. They've recently been buying farmland. There's a host of other issues surrounding the CCP that are detrimental to this country, and in some ways are being facilitated by the current administration. So there you have it. If you take a look at all of the stories that were presented today, it points to centralized government. That's why we at the Patriot Think Tank are strong supporters of Article 5 of our Constitution. If you don't know about Article 5, consider following us on some of our social media platforms or post some comments with your questions. We'll be happy to take the time to answer them. Thank you, and bye for now.